Shout out to Avora, one of our dear homies making this episode possible. Avora AI is known for giving you a substantial amount of time back by automating some of those most basic tasks, getting you home on time and giving you more time with your patients. Project management in dentistry? Say what? If you're anything like me, project management has often been referred to in industries like construction, real estate development, manufacturing, things of that nature. More often than not, people in dentistry, especially emerging and large DSOs, don't talk about actual project management. What they typically have is a visionary, and then they have an integrator or a COO or a director of operations, some regional managers. They usually have some sort of C-suite team that takes care of projects, and they say, hey, we have this goal, now go make it happen. And then it's the responsibility of those below the visionary to really execute on what those milestones or goals are. More often than not, people in those roles don't have traditionally trained or really refined project management skills. They think they do based on probably decades of experience, and they're probably fairly decent at it, but there's no one quite like someone like Abbigail Hogan, also known as Abby, who really pushes back on really defining the timeline, the why, the reasons, and what the specific milestone looks like when you're dealing with visionaries or CEOs. I hear all of the time from CEOs that they end up getting surrounded by yes people, which are people that tend to agree with them because they're so passionate about what they want to implement and execute that people have a really hard time saying no or challenging the idea. And if they do, it's quickly met with, we're doing this anyway, and then they just execute. But then there's also so much nuance when it comes to project management and stuff, quite frankly, that I didn't really think about, and how it goes from being an idea to being fully executed and getting it over the finish line. In a world where so many people are incredibly overwhelmed at the business level and making things happen, bringing somebody like Abby into your organization, even from a fractional perspective, is super helpful. And I'm really excited to share some of this work with all of you because it's not a topic that's talked about enough. And if there's someone that can get a project over the finish line, it's definitely Abby Hogan. And I'm really excited for Abby because she's now living her truth and her passion after starting in dentistry a while back and finally landing herself in a position where she has her own business doing this kind of work. And as you know, I'm always a huge advocate for people really living their purpose and really living their passion, especially women that tend to get a little lost in the sauce. And it's a lot of the work that we do inside the Empowered Leadership Experience for women in dental. Please enjoy this episode with Miss Abby Hogan. Abby Hogan, I'm so happy to have you on the Real Talk of Dental podcast. Over the last 2 years, you have quickly become one of my favorite people in the industry. And we met, like over a year ago at the first collective meetup in Utah, and our paths have crossed multiple times now. And I've also had the pleasure of working alongside you too, which has been like super fun. And something I really gotten to witness since I've gotten to know you is the passion that you bring to your work, how your brain works, which is slightly different than mine, which I always appreciate, and how you process information and projects and all of those things, which has been awesome because now you have launched your own business, really doing a lot of the project management and the big thinking and the big organizing that you are super well known for. And you're starting to see how valuable that is with a lot of the organizations that you work with. And I can attest to it too, being a coach and seeing a lot of DSOs coming up with big projects, things that are going on inside their businesses, and how they actually manage and organize them. And they're not always the best. So, going from point A to point B. So talk to me, because I know you have a lot of opinions about this. You're well-versed in EOS, which I know a lot of groups are using, and you're also well-versed in Working Genius, which I was just introduced to this last year. And so you have some really pointed ideas around these roles and how they can be used to get shit done, basically. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for having me. That's a very generous introduction. I am so happy to be here, and I love that we have connected and are getting to work closely together too. I live and breathe project management and live and breathe that inside of the DSO space, and I find that it's a very underutilized, under-recognized role, except we talk a lot about it sometimes without really knowing and understanding what it is. And so that's my mission, is just like really make sure and help people understand what true project management looks like and help kind of fill that void a little bit and get teams clear on what it is that they're actually supposed to be doing to get stuff done.
Yeah, and so in the traditional EOS model, there's the visionary and then there's the integrator. But you also, through Working Genius, you've been talking to me about the role of the activator, which I really like. And how does that fit into like the traditional integrator role? And I'm thinking because now I've been with a few teams from, a fractional operations perspective or a coach or enrollment, anything like that, where we're actually using EOS. And I can see how there is a slight gap between visionary, integrator, and then what you're now calling an activator role, because the integrator is in charge of so much, right? So you have this visionary, and I know you have a lot of thoughts on what it takes to be a successful visionary as well, but you have this integrator, and then there's like the execution part of it. And I see where a little bit of that gap comes into play, because the integrator is somebody that's really pushing the projects forward and making sure we get across the finish line each quarter. But then the people that are below them that are in charge of those particular projects, sometimes they're not well-versed in project management. And I would love, well, one, I want to hear about the roles, but let's rewind a little bit and talk a little bit more about what does it mean to manage a project? Because that word gets thrown around, and through you, I've gotten to learn a lot more about like the nuance. But I would love for you to explain to people the nuance of project management, because I think that gets overlooked quite a bit.
Yeah, it does. I really discovered this while I was actively living in it. I was hired to be a project coordinator for a DSO in 2020, right when everything exploded. I moved from being a double practice manager into DSO because I was super naive and felt like, well, I just graduated with my business degree. Now it's time for my real job. And I, of course, had no idea at the time what I could have done at that practice. But I moved into this project coordinator role, and I quickly found that I had a lot of the same responsibilities and expectations as the project managers on my team. And there were a lot of us that were hired from a lot of different backgrounds. There were some of us that had office management experience or RCM experience, or had come just from working in the practice, some clinicians even. And then there were also like very traditionally trained PMP project managers. And we all collectively had similar or the same titles. And eventually on that team, I was approached to step into a leadership role and build out a formalized PMO, or a project management organization, and lead that team as the director of project management. And one of the things we quickly needed to right size was the difference between project coordinators and project managers. And what we found really worked for us was having project managers not belong to a team, not belong to any specific leader or process or whatever else. They all came and reported to me. We systemized and built project management structures and tools and like consistent workflows for the project managers, so that when we decided on our annual goals, I could deploy a project manager to one of those goals, depending on what it was. And then on those teams, if they also felt like they needed a level of project support, but they also wanted that person to be deeply integrated into the team and continue to run those processes, then we referred to those as project coordinators. That way they had a little bit of project management training. They came to our group meetings. They learned the project management workflow. I helped in their onboarding and getting them started, but then they sat on their individual team. They didn't join us for our like bigger team stuff. And that was because they needed to have an understanding of the way that their team's workflow actually worked, and also be able to build and create new things as they came along that were very specific to their team. My team specifically focused on like the bigger picture, wide scale company initiatives. And it really did require a really deep understanding and knowledge of true traditional project management. And the reason for that is because when we're looking at growth and the way that we build and create and drive things forward from a true project perspective, what we're really looking at is like taking something that has never existed before and turning it into a recurring process and workflow. And that takes a ton of meticulous planning and research and deep teamwork to really understand the actual impact of the project, both while it's happening and after it's happening. And so clarifying that difference of even the two different roles inside of our team was really helpful. But all of us collectively, project managers and project coordinators, have the same goal of getting stuff done and making sure that the ideas that were generated inside of the business actually turned into reality.
Yeah. And so give an example of like a project that would need project management, because what I see so often is like, especially in EOS model, right? You have your rocks,
Yep.
these goals, these milestones, and then it's like, okay, we need to hit that, right?
Mhm.
So figure out how to hit that. To me, that seems like a project in and of
Mhm.
itself. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but then also, what are some other, I don't know, ideas? Because I think when a lot of people think of project management, I think they look at, I don't even know. I think there's some vagueness to what somebody might consider a quote unquote project. It's almost like this idea of maybe doing an expansion or a remodel or something that's outside of general operations. It's more of like, oh, we're doing this side project, right? This thing that's happening over here that's not part of the main operations and the main business. And then maybe at that point, they bring in a project manager. And I think because traditionally, too, that term is thrown around a lot in construction and in development. Like you have a project manager when it comes to construction and development. But like those industries, right? But then when you think about dentistry, it's like, well, what the hell is a project, right?
Right.
So do you want
Truly.
to define maybe like a couple projects that most people might not consider a project?
Yes, absolutely. You're exactly right, by the way, on all of those examples. And traditional project management inside of construction or manufacturing or product design gets to follow the very traditional approach because it's really easy. Everything is a project. And so, of course, you need project management. But you're right. Inside of dental teams, it's really hard to define sometimes what's a rock and a project and a task and a deliverable and a KPI and all of these like buzzwords, right? Of the things that we need to do. And I love the way you said it actually of a project, the way I define it, is anything that's going to take our business from its current state to its next state, whether that's growth 10 years down the line, whether that's growth next month, something that's not currently happening now that needs some sort of change or a focused approach to move it from point A to point B, and someone specifically assigned to manage and monitor that change. So an example of that could be if you wanted to build out a better dentist onboarding program, right? If you were bringing in a whole bunch of new associates and you wanted to help make sure that their onboarding was really strong, you might have resources that give you amazing ideas or even examples of great onboarding processes, but you've got to do a lot of workflow change. You've got to build it probably into some kind of system. You've got to make sure the checklist looks right. And so the project manager is the one responsible for doing all of that research, maybe collecting some of the systems, getting more information. I looked for project managers who really love to research and find out information and ask a lot of questions, because then I knew that the planning phase was going to be well contained. So looking at all of those things and then processing all of that information, making sure task lists are clear and turning all of the information into an actual step-by-step plan, but then also continuing to monitor that step-by-step plan and then see it to the finish line before it's handed off to a recurring team. A project manager wouldn't necessarily, in this example, run dentist onboarding forever the way that I would see it. You could have a project coordinator or someone else in a role who's, a dentist onboarding leader, right? Have project management skills, but the project of dentist onboarding needs to be managed and monitored by someone who doesn't necessarily have the skill set of like traditional project management because they're dentists. We want to make sure that they're well taken care of by someone who knows dentists and speaks their language and can clearly communicate with them and support them, where a project manager is really focused on turning that idea of expanding dentist onboarding into a real recurring system and process inside of the business. Any other like new hires that are expanding a function of the company could be managed as a project. Building out a better procurement process. I manage projects related to integrating new accounting software and building out new practice management systems, updating a full, data management process for our FP&A team. All kinds of different things can be considered as projects, and you'd be surprised at really how easy it is to start pointing your finger and landing on a project really anywhere you look.
Yeah. So like a project could be a lot of people have issues with like RCM, right? So a big project could be cleaning. You hear all the time, like, oh, we need to clean up RCM. Or maybe they're making a big practice management software shift, right? So they're transitioning to a new practice management software. I mean, that's a massive project. I like what you said as far as like onboarding and associate onboarding and hiring and things like that. That for sure is a project. So let's say somebody comes to you and they are looking to clean up RCM, like there's been an ongoing issue with how billing and collections are handled and all of that. Now, what I've typically seen is that issue will come up and say, okay, we need to focus on this. This is a big focus. And it'll get handed off to the integrator or director of operations or COO. And then that gets transitioned on to maybe somebody that's overseeing office managers or overseeing an RCM team or something like that. And you can see this kind of pass down of responsibility. But usually people in those seats or those roles have decent project management skills, but not in the formal sense. But then also, I think either they're too far removed and they get into a point where they're like, I need you to just get this shit done, take care of it, right? Because they're too overwhelmed with all of the quote unquote projects. And then you have somebody that is the one that's supposed to like get the shit done. And they're also getting shit done on 5 other projects. And even though we have the rocks, right? But let's be real, there's always the day-to-day operations that they really need to oversee. Oftentimes they're too close to the project, right? They have too much of an emotional attachment, or they're easy to persuade because team members are saying, we can't do this, and this is too hard, and I don't know about this, and they've been in that position before, so they're like, I get it, so you kind of emotionally get derailed a little bit. But walk me through, like, if somebody was to bring you in the sense of like a fractional project manager or something like that, where you're coming in and you can manage the oversight of that. Because I've seen you at work, because you come in and you're like, bam, 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 you're like, Asana, Monday.com, like you're just jamming on like all of these things, and you're putting together this amazing flow of systems. And it's like, oh, okay. And it's so beautiful because you create this dashboard where like everyone has visibility. And I think that's something that's super important too when it comes to project management, is like the visibility of it. Because a lot of people are like, yo, get this done, take care of it, Susie Q. And Susie's on it, but she's not relaying a lot of the process to everybody else because everyone's just so much going on, right? And things get lost and projects get derailed and they get delayed, and people are always blindsided that things aren't getting handled the way they thought they were, et cetera, et cetera. So talk to me about like if somebody had this, they need to clean up the RCM stuff, like where would you as an activator come in and be able to help them versus like them using their existing team?
Yeah, it's such a great question, because in this example, let's say Susie Q is this RCM leader, okay, just for the sake of the story. So something you said over and over again, I really want to emphasize. You said over and over again, this project that is clean up RCM. And that right there is where I would push back and say, what do you mean clean up RCM? Now, sometimes we go from the idea of clean up RCM to the actual implementation of cleaning up RCM, and an RCM leader might know exactly what cleaning up RCM looks like. And that's what we see most consistently, of the phrase being said or the idea being generated, clean up RCM, and someone knowing generally what they need to do if clean up RCM means get it back on track to our baseline of what it's supposed to be. We may not need to look at that as a true formal project if we're not actually changing an RCM process. But if what was happening over and over again was a leader said clean up RCM and the team felt like they were cleaning up RCM according to their standards, and the leader kept feeling like, I don't know what it is about this team and why they can't get it together, but RCM has not been cleaned up all year. Where the team is thinking, what do you mean it's not been cleaned up all year? We've continued to clean it up every single time you've asked. The problem is in the ability to articulate exactly and explicitly what you're looking for. That's not necessarily the RCM team's skill set in extracting a very clear and detailed vision from the visionary. And it's maybe not necessarily the visionary's explicit job or skill set to be able to define exactly the key deliverables that they're looking for. And so that's the role of an activator or a project manager or someone in between who doesn't have a bias on either side. This isn't their team where they're caught up in the emotion of how many times they've cleaned up RCM, and they're not this leader who's caught up in the emotion of how many times they've had to repeat themselves over and over. The role of the activator in this scenario can turn to the leader or the visionary and say, when you say clean up RCM, what is it that you're actually looking for? Tell me about the problems that are happening. Tell me about where you're not seeing deliverables met. Help me understand and bring me into your world and really immerse me into what you see as a part of the problem. Then the activator could turn to the RCM team and say, RCM team, I love you so much, you darling little angels. You guys have done such a great job cleaning up RCM over and over. Here's where we're not quite getting it, or here's where we're going to make an adjustment in the process so that you don't have to continue over and over again to clean it up without clarity of what cleaning up actually looks like for the leader. And so while it can be really hard to get to that point where we're going straight from the idea generator to the team of really clearly articulating and defining exactly what the rock or the project or the goal might look like, the activator usually can step in, or the project manager can usually step in and say, hey, team, let's all work together, and I'm going to act as a little bit of a translator, a little bit of as a middle person, and help make sure that this project, the way that you want it done, visionary, the way that it's in your brain and you can't quite articulate it, actually happens to the team. And so there's a lot of trust building that needs to happen with the leader to make sure that you really can get into their brain and understand that when they say this, maybe they mean this, or here's where I need to push and ask more questions. And it also requires a lot of trust building with the team so that you're not showing up and disrupting the way that they're currently doing their processes or discrediting all of the work that they have done this year, cleaning up RCM over and over, right? But helping them understand why it's important to look at it in this new way and what cleaning it up actually means and how it's going to impact the entire team collectively to perform better and work more efficiently.
Yeah, the clarity piece is so huge, right? And I love that you push back on that to get super, super clear on exactly what it is that they need and want and what that looks like. I mean, I see that all the time in especially leadership work. People have an idea of what they think they want or how they think they want to feel, but oftentimes they don't understand the why or what the driver is behind that. And I know it's a little bit different than, the project management piece, but it's kind of the same, where people don't actually spend the time to get really clear on what it is that they want. And even for folks like you and I, like in our businesses, I mean, I have a marketing coach and she all the time is just asking me asking these defining questions and these details. And there's countless times I'm like rolling my eyes like, oh my God, like why do I have to keep digging into the depths of my soul to really get clear on what it is that I want or the drivers. But I love it because I appreciate her and I know exactly what she's doing. And at the same time, it's not always fun to keep drilling down to the why and get super, super clear, because it can get a little confronting where you're almost like, I don't freaking know, man. I don't know. You tell me. You tell me what I should think. It kind of gets you to this point, but it calls you to the mat, so to speak. So that's kind of bigger picture stuff, right? Probably not as intense or severe when you're talking about, billing and collections, but it's also putting your butt on the line, essentially, what exactly it is that you want, how do you want to get there, and what timeline, and then you're able to execute it. Hey, I just want to pop in on today's episode and talk to you about this new GPT I wrote called Boundary Boss GPT. And it's for those moments where you've said yes to something and immediately felt that pit in your stomach, or maybe you've now written 5 drafts of an email because you're trying not to sound mean, even though you're exhausted and you swear you've said this thing so many times to the same person. Or you're kind of sick and tired of staying late, taking it on, smoothing things over, and wonder why you're the one that's always burning out. A lot of the conversations that I have on this podcast, we often hear about people hitting these walls of burnout and oftentimes not even knowing what to say. So that's why I built Boundary Boss GPT. It's kind of like having me in your pocket when you're about to respond to a text, email, or team issue. and you just don't know what to say because your people-pleasing brain is completely hijacking you. This is going to help you have clarity, confidence, and self-respect without the guilt, over-explaining, or the drama. Go ahead and grab it in the show notes below. It's totally free, and you're going to love it. Okay, now back to this awesome conversation. So talk to me a little bit more about what you've seen as far as like visionaries lacking clarity and the impact that that's had on organizations.
Yeah, you kind of called it out where it can start to feel really frustrating when I would imagine I'm not a visionary myself. I don't claim that role or that title, but I can imagine based on what I've seen and the teams that I've worked with that it can feel really exhausting and overwhelming to constantly be asked every question and be asked to clarify every single detail all the time, especially if you are in a role or you're the type of visionary who's really good at coming up with ideas, but not necessarily running them through the whole pathway of work to see it to the finish line. And so where we can jump in and help support different ideas across the team. And if you're familiar with the Working Genius, you mentioned at the beginning, it outlines this kind of these 6 phases that work has to pass through in order for it to get done. And visionaries typically sit in one of the 2 beginning phases of either wondering why something exists or coming up with an idea to solve a problem. And where I really try to push and encourage people to live or to find people that live in this zone is in this activator place who can help identify those right ideas, who can ask those questions and work with you collaboratively. So I know some of the visionaries that I've worked with also feel like this struggle of always having to answer every question and make every decision and jump in and help solve every problem. And that can be really exhausting and overwhelming, especially if you're familiar with the Working Genius model at all. And you know that most visionaries might sit in some kind of wonder or idea generation or just coming up with new ideas and things to solve, then having to then switch your brain and also be in a role where you're answering questions and seeing things to the finish line can feel really exhausting. So having someone who is in some type of activator role or someone who's really good at helping you identify if what the idea that you came up with is actually a good idea or if it's really going to serve the business in the best way, or if we really need that idea to happen right now or later, or who needs to be involved, someone who can help galvanize that idea or really make it really strong and powerful and pull the right people and systems into play. That's the missing piece to help clarify the real vision and the real insight and what's needed. But there also has to be a lot of trust that's built there, right? I've worked with a leader in the past as well, who was my direct boss, who sat in a visionary role, and I could never get a commitment to an actual plan. So while I am an activator and I live in that world, no matter how hard I pushed or really tried to get clarity or decision or an excited energy or anything about the next step or the next phase that the team was going to live in, it just was useless, right? Like all of the time and energy that we spent trying to extract the vision just didn't happen because a commitment to a decision couldn't be made. So your original question being like, how do we work with a team or how do you work with an activator to help extract that vision is really like finding an activator and finding a person on your team who's maybe not necessarily the best person at living in that world and getting all of those things done, or the person who's coming up with new ideas, but someone who you trust and you enjoy working with and you have a really strong collaborative relationship with to be able to push back and forth and rally and identify truly what is actually needed and how that's going to move forward.
Yeah, because I think a lot of people that are in that visionary role, it can be a blessing and a curse, right? Like they're constantly seeing the future, like they're future tripping all the time and they're coming up with cool ideas. And they're usually the people that are also, going to conferences and they're out and about and they're seekers, they're learners, they're competitive, they're driven. And so that's kind of the upside because they have their foot on the gas and they're the ones driving the company forward. But at the same time, they can hear so many ideas and not pause and think, well, is this applicable to my company and where I want to go and where we are going? And or it's, changing their mind all the time. Like, oh, another new thing's coming along. We got to focus on this or we got to do this. Like there's always this shift and nothing gets followed through to fruition. And I really like what you're saying in your role because, again, you have the visionaries, you have the integrators, you have the operations people, the COOs, the directors, you have these people. But I will say with that, I've been to many CEO conferences, and one of the things CEOs say is really common is when you're in that role, you end up getting surrounded by yes people, right? So you lose the no people. You lose the people that challenge you because you're the check signer and they want to make you happy, and they're kind of saying, yeah, boss, that's a great idea. Sure, we can do that. Maybe they challenge you like a tiny bit, but at the end of the day, if you're really psyched and you're really geeked about this project, they want to help you, see your vision through. But if you have somebody like you coming in saying, hold up, this makes no sense. How are you going to do this, this, and this? And then when they come with their next new shiny idea in a month or two from now saying, hey, I want to pivot and do this, you're like, hang on, we still didn't even get through this project. And really making sure that everything matches for what they want. And I think visionaries, like what makes them so great is also their Achilles heel, so to speak. And having that awareness and having that restraint, I think, is super, super critical. But also having someone like you around that's known for pushing back, that's known for challenging and asking the really defining questions, which somebody who just wants to go full speed ahead can get really agitated by it because they're like, just do the damn thing. Stop asking me so many questions,
Yes. Yes, totally. And that's where that trust comes in. And the visionary integrator relationship is really beautiful because that's kind of what the goal of it is to be that trusting, challenging relationship. And so this activator role can, of course, be your integrator and live in that place, and identifying how your integrator is set up to be able to actually activate and move forward on the projects that you want to have happen, but be able to push back and lovingly say, I love that idea. It doesn't make any sense for us to do right now. Can we put it on the backlog? And then having a system to be able to do that. One of the things that I would train, two of the things that I would train project managers like excessively over and over and over on was maintaining a backlog and always calling back to, that's a great idea. It's going on the backlog, right? In the kindest way that we can say it. It's not fitting on the list of things that we have committed to and we have to get done right now. Your idea generator is on fire. We love you. We're so grateful for it. Kiss on the forehead. Go sit over there. Please don't come up with a new idea, right? I was like always trying to communicate that. And then the second piece of it is being able to communicate assertively and be able to live in a world of not being aggressive ever and not challenging in a rude or unkind or hurtful way those ideas. I've seen that communication and I've seen how almost instantly it changes the relationship from trusting to just like not functioning at all. But being able to communicate assertively and be able to clearly articulate and identify why that problem is maybe not one that needs solving, or why the solution to a problem that's been defined is maybe not the best one. And so having enough insight about the company and how things work, but then that trusting relationship with the visionary to be able to push back is super helpful. I'm an 8 Enneagram. I'm literally a challenger. That's who I am at my core. And so I've never been afraid to raise my hand and say, this just doesn't make sense, or I think we're looking at this wrong. And I really feel like I live that through my work and have learned to channel that communication and make sure that I'm always living in an assertive place and never aggressive, but also never passive, so that things don't move forward without me being able to see them. And those are the roles that I feel I really thrive in, when I'm trusted to push back and give my feedback to help drive the right things forward, for sure.
Yeah, and you're coming from a place of wanting to get the result, right? So I don't know why, but as you're talking about this visual and analogy is coming to mind for me, and those that have worked with me have heard about this story a million times, because 2 summers ago, my husband and I came to like heads over landscaping, and it was really interesting because I'm definitely more of a visionary in our relationship, and I can sort of see things and I have ideas, and like I feel I'm highly intuitive, right? So I can feel and see things and all of this. And he's very methodical. He goes at a much like slower pace. And I'm just like, let's get it done. Like I see it, like now I need to execute on it, right? And I'll sit with stuff for a really long time before I want to execute, but then when I'm ready to execute, I'm ready to execute. And I don't bring people along for the journey usually, and then they're like trying to catch up. But one of the things with landscaping is I had this vision of like what I wanted, and because I don't know much about gardening or plants or any of that, I didn't really take into consideration like proper spacing, how much sun they needed, soil conditions, watering conditions, how to group things together based on like certain dynamics so they can thrive. And you can kind of think like plants are like the people on your team, right? Like they need certain conditions for things to really thrive. And yeah, they can survive, but maybe not well, right? If the conditions aren't great. And so I just wanted to throw a bunch of stuff in the ground and just go for it. And he put the brakes on so much stuff. And it was like grating to my nerves that like I couldn't see everything through, to the point where we had to get a little bit of like coaching ourselves around it, because we just had come to heads. And I was like, you're ruining my life. I want this landscaping. Why are you taking away my creativity? I made it into like a whole thing. And he was like, I just don't want the plants to die. And who's going to take care of all these things you're putting in the ground? Like me, because once I get the vision done, I'm on to the next thing. And so we ended up coming to terms with it. I had to do a lot of my own work. We both had to compromise somewhere in between. But the idea was, I felt like he was kind of the project manager in this, where he was just like, hold up. And turns out, he'll love this, but turns out he was right. And I really messed up a few things. But now, as a result, from like him saying, slow down, what does this plant need? Because even this year, I'm like, I want this plant. And he's like, Brandi, it's not going to work where you want it to go. And I'm like, roses everywhere. It turns out roses are the most fickle things in the world. But anyway, it's just been like that kind of thing where you also need to wait like a couple years for certain plants to like flourish and see their potential. And it's kind of the same thing when you're implementing certain projects or systems or people. It's like you got to give it some room to breathe. And if you're constantly rushing and pushing and all this stuff, it's like it might work, but not to like its fullest possibility, I guess.
Yeah.
So,
absolutely. This is actually a great analogy. And the way that it integrates into dental teams is that if you're the visionary and you want rose bushes in every practice, let's combine the two. Let's landscape our dental offices, right? If you want rose bushes in every practice, and to you, Brandi, because you love roses and you were just at the rose garden and you felt so alive and all of the emotions are there, right? And the need that you have for these rose bushes inside of all of these practices is top of mind for you. You're not sleeping and you can't think about anything else. My job, if I was your project manager, would be to really hear you and really understand why these roses are so important to you, and make sure that I'm really clearly understanding what the impact of these roses was for you and what it's going to be on the business. One thing that's different about dental teams and traditional construction or manufacturing teams is that we have to prioritize patient care. And so if your rose bushes were actually a new tool or a new process or something that would actually help your patients significantly more, I can't push back as much. I don't have the ability to say, Brandi, rose bushes, come on, that's crazy. What does it matter if they're rose bushes or, boxwoods, right? But if it's impacting patient care, I have to be flexible as your project manager. And I'm the one who has to compromise first to be able to allow you to prioritize those patients' needs. But it's also my job to have a clear list of all of the other projects that we were actively working on and be able to tell you, okay, I'm ready to move forward, but now tell me which one of these things we're deprioritizing and taking off the list so that I can move this up. And I need to be showing that to you every week. I need us to be very clear of what our project list actually looks like so that you're starting to see the impact of all of these new ideas and all of the new plants that you want put in the dental offices and what that actually means for all of the other really important and impactful things that are going to happen. But if there wasn't a patient support thing that was happening and it was genuinely just that you wanted rose bushes, I should be able to say, okay, you're serious about this. You really want these rose bushes put in. Tell me where it fits on the list. Do you want to deprioritize the new practice management software that's going to give us better data? Are you going to deprioritize dentist onboarding? Are you going to deprioritize the RCM cleanup or, building out a new operatory to serve disabled patients? Like, you tell me. If the rose bushes are that important to you, that's totally fine. I hear you, but it's your job as the visionary to tell me which of these things we're going to stop doing.
Yeah, I love that. I love it. Abby, thank you so much. You are a genius. And I'm super grateful that you are living out your passion and what you're so good at, because I don't see a lot of this, honestly, in the dental space, or somebody's so specific about project management and helping people get things over the finish line that's outside of an organization, and you are an activator and you really do create beautiful systems and structures to really help people get things done. And for people that are wildly exhausted with the million things they have on their plate and all the different things that are managing, you're always a breath of fresh air because you're like, I got this. And you can help really create some really amazing tools to help people. So I'm super glad we were able to have this conversation and really break down a topic that isn't talked about a lot. I think people take for granted the nuance that goes into proper project management and a lot of the goals and milestones and dreams that people have, and how having a structure can actually be incredibly helpful. So thank you so much. You're the best.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. This is what I live for. And the more people that I can help just understand this specific process and this specific workflow is just like a dream to me. So thanks so much.
Thanks to our friends at Archie, the future of dental software, using AI agents that make it easier to run your dental practice, outpacing a lot of the outdated models. Get Archie. Make your life easier. You just listened to the real talk of dental. If it hit, if it stung, if it made you feel just a little more human, good. That's the point. This isn't about fixing practices, it's about healing people. And if you're brave enough to show up real in this industry, you're my kind of leader. Subscribe, call in, send your wildest workplace confession. And most importantly, don't clean up for anyone. The mess, that's where the magic lives. We'll see you again on the next episode.